Welcome to Discovering. I'm standing next to Lake Plumbago in Alberta. I'm doing a little bit of fishing, not doing any catching. And behind me is the Alberta Village and the old sawmill that was built by Henry Ford. Tonight on Discovering, we'll talk a little bit about the history of Alberta and the sawmill, and what is happening here in Alberta today, and some plans for the future.
This was built 35 public relations because Ford was a hero up here. He employed a lot of people.
And continuing with the history theme, we take a boat tour of the Portage Canal.
More than 14 billion pounds of copper were mined in the copper country since 1844.
So sit back and relax. It's Monday night and it's time for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill. The eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
Driving along Highway 41 between Covington and Lawrence, you might have wondered why it says Ford alongside a pond, or wondered what the old buildings across the highway from it were for. The area I'm talking about is called Alberta Village, and the largest of the old buildings with the 94-foot smokestack was one of Henry Ford's sawmills.
Henry Ford built a town, 1935. Started in 1935, he said it was wrapped up basically in 1937. It was more for public relations. This was not a mill that was used for real heavy production in his factory or his empire, because they were phasing wood out by 1935. The Woodies made in Kingsford required wood, but the Model Ts, the Model As were the early years. And he had a mill in Lawrence, Bequaming, Big Bay. He had some iron mines up here, and then he had the operations in Kingsford, which is huge. But they claim he had, plus minus 750,000 acres in the UP. Because every vehicle required, some of them 250 board feet plus for the vehicle. So that's a lot of wood. He had this place, it was the most modern town. Come in, see the most modern town, see how a board is made. Even in 1935, a lot of people didn't know how a board was made. And so it was really it was an educational thing that respect, but it was about his image, basically. The wood was used, a lot of it that was cut here was used to build houses then. The original plans and everything for this here was to be a town of 64 houses, a general store, and a post office. And it never developed, obviously. So the original town now is Sawmill, the pump house reception building, 12 houses, 2 schoolhouses, and a service building was the original Ford town site. He built the lake, he dammed up Plumbago Creek. They rerouted US 41 along the wall of the dam, rerouted. This is old US 41 that goes right through town. That's the old road. It's some of the short and sweet of, Ford here. Ford was a hero up here. He employed a lot of people. That went from 1935 to 1954. Ford was starting to eliminate a lot of their holdings up here, so they donated the town site along with 1,700 acres here going down past the Sturgeon River to Michigan Tech Forestry Department to be used for educational purposes. Still doing that. Good job, nice wood. Beautiful. You hear a lot of remarks. People have been out there, they've never seen trees like that. I mean, it's by management. And Henry Ford himself said, if you cut a tree down, you use everything but the shade. no waste, which is cool.
Michigan Tech used the sawmill for research on log yield and grade from 1954 until the early 80s.
Because I was the sawyer, the head sawyer at the end, and you got to know when to turn that log to get maximum yield off of it. So we could cut 6,000 feet or 8,000 feet here in a day. We would make more money off of that timber than a mill down the road cutting 15,000 feet of wood a day than not knowing how to cut the log. The sawmill sat down in 1981 is when the logs quit coming here. Now they just get sold. And so they go somewhere else. But that research that was done from 54 to 1980 was valuable information as to how to log and, all that research.
Alberta's primary use today is the Ford Center, Michigan Tech's forestry campus.
About the same time as the sawmill shut down, it's been a field station and an educational setting for our forestry, wildlife, natural resource students. And so it has been ever since. And it's still today, the primary use of Alberta is it's the home of the Ford Center. It is still the last remaining university in the country that the students, forestry students and wildlife students come and spend an entire semester immersed in field studies.
Around 1996, the sawmill opened for tours to the public. However, this site has not been open to the public for about 5 years due to safety concerns and much-needed repairs and upgrades.
It was operated for several years, off and on, by the Historical Society and volunteers. And as those things go, people age out, and you aren't able to keep those things operating.
Last year, it was heard that Michigan Tech planned to demolish the old pump house building and the sawmill, and a group organized to save them.
Because we have so many buildings here, and because the sawmill is not part of our teaching and research missions, right? It's not really possible for us to justify spending money keeping this place open, right? So for that reason, there's private citizens coming to help that out.
When the word came out a year ago that there was a threat to the continued existence of the building that we're in, there was a tremendous amount of local interest. Our plan is to find a sustainable way to fix up the sawmill. And so it comes down to a question of support and economics, and we're enthusiastic about Michigan Tech's support for having this declared on the National Registry as an historic site.
We had a phone call with some of the state of Michigan folks, and they found it really hard to believe, and they were really impressed that what Henry Ford had given to Michigan Tech is all here still. It's all intact. All the forest is still as he left it to us, and maybe even better, and the village is still here as well. So to have all of those pieces still together is quite rare.
Definitely worth preserving.
And everything that you're going to see in here is basically the same equipment from the old days, except for the carriage up there. The original was run with a steam engine, which you see over here is a locomotive type engine that produced the steam. And this is the big smokestack that you see as you're coming down the road, coming onto this boiler. And if you ever run it again, that's where you smoke your fish on this end. See all these black chutes coming down? See, he was one of those kind of guys didn't waste anything. Like I said, the tree, you use everything but the shade. Well, upstairs is the equipment, what you'll see. But as those were running, the sawdust would come down these chutes, these black chutes here. All the sawdust would come down there, and in the floor, there's a black thing going through. There's a conveyor there that brings all the sawdust right over into the boiler, and it was burned. So there's no waste. Because you go by mills, you see all these big sawdust piles everywhere. Not here. It was all burnt. It was used, which is neat.
While we were there, somebody else wanted a tour of the sawmill. Maybe he wanted to learn a better way to chuck wood.
Lake Plumbago. The water would come into this pump house right here where you were just in, and they would pump the water from there into the log pond so they'd have water to float the logs over to the, up to the log chute over there. They'd put the logs in there. There was steam going into that, so it would actually thaw the logs out. It would wash them. There was high pressure washes even as the log came up this chain. So they would come in here clean of dirt and everything and thawed out, because you cannot cut frozen timber with a bandsaw very easily. I really experienced that. It's crazy. This chute here, this is the bull chain. That's the log pond. They come in and then roll them onto the conveyor belt here. Now that is the carriage over there, that piece that's right where I'm sitting, that is the carriage, and that is the one I was talking about that was replaced. Bring this carriage over, it's run on this cable right here, and you'd line the carriage up with the length of the log, and then you'd roll it onto there, and then you can flip it. There's the log turner right there. That little thing that comes up, very important. And then I would hit these buttons here. This is the log turner and all this, and there's over here for the set works. So this was my job here, was the head sawyer. But I ran all the other equipment too. Yeah, we gotta get a hat up here. So this carriage would come back and forth, and then once you got that log squared up, then you just get regular old boards right off would come off. Then you'd get over to here, you would have a slab that come off of that log that looks like this. And it doesn't have the square edges. So this is the trimmer. What it does is it trims all those rough edges off. So when it comes through, there's saws in there. You can adjust this so it'll be a 4, 5, 6, 8-inch wide board, and it'll cut all that edge off. And when it comes out on the other side, you'll see it cut the edges of the board off. That was all rough. Here's what you get, a nice straight board. And then this comes over here to the trimmer. This is for length. From 6 to 18-foot lumber you could cut here, and the saws here would trim the edges off. So this is called a green chain, and the lumber would come off of there to length, and then it would come down and go out here to the green chain, where they'd pull it off according to grade. If it was like selecting better lumber, number 1, number 2, or and they'd pile it that way then, and it would be sold in like a pack of 1,000 feet. Some would go for hardwood flooring, some would go for pallet stock. The slab boards would come down here and get cut into lengths for firewood. And if you needed 20-inch wood, you would put the stop at 20, 18, whatever, and they'd cut all the wood up. All of this here was not wasted. It would go to the houses to burn.
And it's really a step back in time to see how this mill operated back in the day. Also within Alberta Village is Dave's business, Nature's Way Woodworking, where he builds and sells his unique bird-eye maple furniture and gifts, and his rock shop, and we'll take a closer look at that in a future episode. And opening on June 23rd is an artisan gallery inside the old pump house building.
When I first moved here looking for a house after accepting a teaching job at Lance, drove by Alberta here, and I kind of just thought, well, I want to get to know more, and stopped in and saw Dave at the rock shop. And so I started renting a house here in town. And then after a couple months, I was approached about maybe wanting to use this building to, use it to teach maybe classes or use it as a studio. And my idea is to get local artists involved, sell their work, do some classes, painting outside. And for me, being an artist, it's just like inspiring everywhere I go. I'm out on my porch, sitting, painting. I can go across the way and go out there and sit and paint and draw. So it's very calming here.
We're really excited that this pump house is going to be fixed up for this season, because this space that you're looking at here will give us a place to take some of the exhibits from the sawmill and put them in as interim exhibits so that people will be able to get the flavor of Alberta even as work continues on the sawmill, which is probably going to take some period of time. So we're really excited that Jackie, the artist, lives here in Alberta, and that she's negotiating an arrangement with Michigan Tech to use this space, so it'll be a shared space, and it'll be to everybody's benefit.
Restoring this is continuing Ford's legacy. The sawmill was originally built to educate the public. Inviting people back in will help keep our lumbering history alive. Continuing on the history theme, you can take a boat ride up and down the Portage Canal between Houghton and Hancock and learn some local history while taking in the sights with Copper Country boat tours.
Welcome aboard the Dragonfly. I'll be your captain and tour guide, Dominic. Before we get underway here, I have some safety announcements.
I jumped on board the SS Dragonfly with Captain Dominic Snell and a handful of other folks to see Houghton and Hancock from the middle of the canal, something I had never done before.
Water we're on is called the Portage Canal. The canal was built in 1864 to extend the Keweenaw waterway, effectively cutting off the Keweenaw from the rest of the UP, making it an island, no longer a peninsula.
I've driven across the Portage Lift Bridge numerous times, yet this was my first time sailing underneath it. Now I've been underneath it 4 times. Dominic is originally from the Copper Country and started doing tours after he moved back.
I was living in Florida and doing tours in Texas, and I every time I came home to visit, I always thought, well, if I move home, I definitely would do a tour, and there was no tours, and I had the opportunity to move back home, and I started the tour. So.
The SS Dragonfly is 100% electric, making it super quiet and can take up to 6 passengers.
The name of the boat is Dragonfly. I bought it with the name, and it's bad luck to change the name of a boat. So I'm glad there's that superstition, because I had the idea of naming it Pasty or something crazy for the UP. And so the Dragonfly, and I think they named it the Dragonfly because the Dragonfly is quiet and stealth.
A few historical facts on the tour I did know from my own explorations and tours around the Copper Country, but I did learn quite a bit on this tour that I didn't know.
Site of the Copper Range Roundhouse, it's no longer there. You want to see a picture, it's in the book. Quite the massive structure. I surprisingly get a lot of locals and of course tourists, so it's a mix between everybody. And a lot of the locals, they every time they leave, they're like, wow, I learned something new. And I try to mix up the tours. Like if they've been on here before, I try to mix up the tours with different information and try to keep it interesting for myself also. More than 14 billion pounds of copper are mined in the Copper Country since 1844. Another nickname of the land north of the canal is Copper Island. We mined enough copper to make a wire to the moon and back 3 times. Anybody want to guess what gauge that is?
I don't want to give away his whole tour. You'll have to book one for yourself, and it's easy to do. His website is dragonflycopper.com, and it will pop up a calendar with a list of available dates and times. Tours are an hour long. Dominic also works on board the Ranger 3, so he does just do this in his spare time. I had so much fun, I went twice that day and went on the Twilight Tour.
Well, you'll see the sunset tour. The Twilight Tour is what I call it, because you'll see the sunset go down, and then we come back through Houghton and you'll see the reflection of the bridge and the twilight of the night.
We lucked out too with a beautiful sunset and warm, calm evening. As the sun went down and the sky faded to a dark twilight blue, the lift bridge took on a whole new appearance, and that was my favorite part. And I just picked up my bear skull from El Cheapo Skull Taxidermy in the Marquette area. Dan Trainer did an excellent job. He uses dermestid beetles to remove the flesh, and then he has a process for degreasing and whitening it. It took probably a little over 6 months and definitely worth the wait. It looks great. It's so clean. It's so big. I can't believe how big this bear skull is. It's from a 224-pound bear. Had this bear, made it a few more years. he could have been a really big bear just based off this skull here. But yeah, if you didn't see the story on cleaning this bear skull with dermestid beetles and how Dan Trainer does all that, you can find that on my website at discovertheup.com. I have a full episode on it. It's really interesting, very cool. So there it is. That's all for tonight, and I hope to see you right back here next week for Upper Michigan's very own Discovering.